I'm Selena Merlin, 38, an Air Force major who worked her way up from a crowded two-bedroom apartment to leading special operations air crews. For years, I held my family together, the bills, the late-night rescues, the steady support my younger brother depended on. But the day he grabbed my wrist, accused me of stealing a watch I didn't owe him an explanation for, and twisted my arm like I was a stranger, that was the moment everything shifted. Have you ever been dismissed, doubted, or blindsided by someone you'd bent over backwards for? If you have, share your story in the comments. You're in good company. Before I walk you through what happened, tell me where you're watching from. And if you've ever had to claim your dignity back after being pushed too far, hit like and subscribe for more real stories about boundaries, self-respect, and choosing yourself. What unfolded after that confrontation might catch you off guard. I sat in the corner of my mother's backyard during a rare 72-hour pass, nursing a beer I hadn't touched in 20 minutes, watching my younger brother Aiden work the grill like he owned the place. He had that energy, loud, performative, the kind that filled space whether you wanted it to or not. He flipped burgers with exaggerated flair, calling out to cousins and neighbors, making sure everyone saw him. I'd been home less than 6 hours, and already I could feel the familiar tightness forming in my chest. Not anger, just awareness. "Selena," he shouted across the yard, waving a spatula. "You gonna help, or are you just gonna sit there looking serious?" I smiled, kept my voice easy. "I'm on leave, Aiden. That means I get to sit." He laughed, but there was an edge to it. Right. Government money. Must be nice." A few people chuckled. I didn't. The comment landed differently than he probably intended, or maybe exactly how he intended. I couldn't tell anymore. I took a sip of the warm beer and let it pass. Conflict never helped him. Stability did. That's what I told myself every time. Later, when the crowd thinned and the sun dropped lower, Aiden came over and sat in the chair next to mine. He smelled like charcoal and cologne, too much of both. He glanced at my boots. Standard issue. Nothing flashy, but he noticed them anyway. "Those new?" he asked. "New enough." "How much the Air Force pay for those?" I looked at him. "They're boots, Aiden." "Yeah, but like, good boots. You can tell." He leaned back, arms crossed. "You barely work now anyway, right? Since you're flying a desk?" There it was again. That tone. Like my work was theoretical. Like sitting in a tactical operations center coordinating assets across 3 time zones was somehow less real than his sales job at a mid-tier tech firm he complained about weekly. "I work plenty," I said quietly. He grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm just saying. Must be nice to get all that government backing. Healthcare, pension, the whole deal." I didn't respond. I've learned that silence is often the best answer to statements disguised as questions. He didn't actually want to know what my job entailed. He wanted to measure it, to price it, to figure out if I had more than him and, if so, why. Our mother came out then, carrying a tray of lemonade, smiling in that way she does when she's trying to smooth over tension she can sense, but doesn't want to name. "You two catching up?" "Always," Aiden said brightly, standing to take the tray from her. "Selena's just telling me about her fancy boots." Mom shot me a look, apologetic, pleading. I gave her a small nod. "It's fine. I'm fine." But I wasn't sure I was. Over the next few days, I noticed more. Small things. The way Aiden kept tabs on what I wore, what I drove, what I carried. When I took out my keys to move my car, he snatched them out of my hand before I could react. "Just want to see the model," he said, dangling them. "Aiden, relax. I'm curious. What are taxpayers funding these days?" He inspected the key fob, turned it over. "Not bad. Not great, but not bad." I took the keys back, slower than I wanted to, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's a car." "Yeah, but it's your car. Paid for by Uncle Sam, right?" "I pay for my own car, Aiden." He shrugged, already moving on, already dismissing the correction. "If you say so." That night, I sat at the kitchen table with my mother after he'd left. She folded dish towels in silence for a while before speaking. "He's going through a rough patch," she said softly. "I know. New friends. New hobbies. He's trying to figure things out." I nodded. I knew the pattern. Aiden cycled through phases, new interests, new expenses, new justifications for why he needed to borrow money. And Mom always helped. She couldn't not help. It's who she was. He's borrowing again? I asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Just until his commission check comes through. I didn't ask how many times she'd heard that before. I already knew. The next afternoon, I was packing my duffel when Aiden came into the guest room without knocking. His eyes went immediately to the black watch box sitting on the dresser. "What's that?" he asked. I glanced over. A gift. From a colleague. For what? Does it matter? He picked up the box before I could stop him, turning it over in his hands like he was appraising it. Must have been some project. It was. You gonna open it? Eventually. He set it down, but his eyes lingered on it longer than they should have. There was something in his expression I couldn't quite name. Not curiosity. Not even envy. Something tighter. Something that looked almost like resentment. People who think they're better than family just because they're in uniform, he said suddenly, his voice quieter now. They forget where they came from. I stopped folding the shirt in my hands. What does that mean? Nothing. He shrugged. Just saying. You've changed. I haven't. You have. He walked to the door, paused. You used to be normal. And then he was gone. I stood there, shirt still in my hands, feeling something crack open that I'd kept carefully sealed for years. I wanted to follow him, to ask what he meant, to defend myself. But I didn't. Because deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. He'd already decided who I was. And that version didn't include the years of work, the deployments, the evaluations, the nights I stayed awake wondering if I was good enough to lead the people depending on me. To him, I was just someone with better boots. That evening, I found myself alone in the backyard again, watching the sky darken. I thought about the watch box. About the engraving I hadn't mentioned. About the operation I couldn't talk about even if I wanted to. About how Aiden saw a gift and assumed it was unearned. I thought about the distance growing between us, slow and inevitable, like continental drift. And I realized something I didn't want to admit. He wasn't just comparing himself to me anymore. He was resenting the fact that the comparison existed at all. When I left the next morning, he didn't come out to say goodbye. Mom stood on the porch, waving, her smile small and sad. I waved back, pulled out of the driveway, and felt the tightness in my chest loosen just slightly as the house disappeared in my rearview mirror. I told myself it was temporary. That he'd settle. That things would smooth out. But part of me already knew they wouldn't. I came home for 48 hours before my next rotation. Special operations tasking, classified location, timeline uncertain. Standard procedure. I didn't tell Aiden the details because I couldn't, and even if I could, I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. I wore the watch for the first time that morning. Black dial, understated, the kind of piece you wouldn't notice unless you were looking. I wasn't trying to make a statement. I just liked it. It kept accurate time across zones, which mattered in my line of work, and it had weight to it. Solid, dependable. I slipped it on while packing my go bag and forgot about it until I walked into my mother's kitchen. Aiden was already there, leaning against the counter with a cup of coffee, scrolling through his phone. He glanced up when I entered, and his eyes went immediately to my wrist. He froze. Not subtly. His whole body went still, and his expression shifted surprise, then something sharper. "Is that a Rolex?" he asked. "Morning to you too," I said, moving toward the coffee pot. He stepped in front of me, blocking my path. "Selena, is that a Rolex?" "It's a watch, Aiden. You can't afford a Rolex." His voice rose, louder than it needed to be. "Where did you get that?" I kept my tone calm measured. "It was a gift." A gift. He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh. It was sharp, bitter. "From who? Did you steal it?" The accusation hit like a slap. I stared at him, trying to process what he'd just said. "Excuse me." "You heard me." He grabbed my wrist. Hard. His fingers dug in just above the watch band, and I felt my pulse spike, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of it. "You can't afford this." "So where did you really get it?" "Aiden." My voice dropped, firm and clear. "Let go." He didn't. Instead, he twisted my wrist, turning it over so he could see the back of the watch. I could have stopped him. I could have used any number of techniques drilled into me over 2 decades of service. But I didn't. I wanted to see how far he'd take this. His eyes scanned the engraving. I watched his face change as he read the words etched into the steel, property of CIA, Special OPS. He let go like the watch had burned him. His hand dropped, and he took a step back. His face went pale, then red, then pale again. He looked at me like he didn't recognize me. He couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't steal it, I said quietly. It's issued equipment. From a joint task force I can't discuss. And you just accused me of theft. He opened his mouth, closed it. Opened it again. I didn't, you did. He shook his head, stepping back toward the door. You think you're some kind of hero, don't you? I think I'm someone who earned what she has, I said. And I think you just crossed a line you can't uncross. He stared at me for another beat, his jaw working like he wanted to say something else, but couldn't find the words. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door hard enough that the frame rattled. I stood there in the kitchen alone, my wrist still tingling where he'd grabbed it. I looked down at the watch. The engraving caught the light. I thought about the operation it represented, the coordination, the risk, the trust required to execute something that sensitive. I thought about the people I'd worked with, the ones who depended on me to make the right call under pressure. And then I thought about my brother, who'd looked at all of that and assumed theft. Not achievement. Theft. The betrayal wasn't the grab. It wasn't even the accusation. It was realizing that he genuinely believed I was more capable of stealing than earning. That somewhere along the way, he decided my integrity, the one thing I'd protected through deployments, evaluations, and years of service, was worth less than his need to feel superior. My mother came in a few minutes later, her face tight with worry. What happened? Ask Aiden, I said, pouring coffee I no longer wanted. He looked upset. He should be. She wrung her hands, standing in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to come closer or leave. Selena, he's just don't. I turned to face her, keeping my voice gentle but firm. Don't make excuses for him. Not this time. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with that same sad, helpless expression she'd worn my whole life whenever Aiden did something she couldn't defend, but couldn't condemn either. I finished my coffee in silence, rinsed the cup, and went upstairs to finish packing. My wrist still ached where he grabbed it. I rolled my shoulder, stretched my fingers, and checked the watch. Still keeping perfect time. I thought about taking it off. About putting it back in the box and forgetting the whole thing. But I didn't. Because the watch wasn't the problem. It never had been. The problem was that Aiden couldn't see me as anything other than competition. And I was tired of pretending that wasn't exhausting. When I came back downstairs an hour later, he still hadn't returned. My mother sat at the kitchen table, staring at nothing. He'll come back, she said quietly. I know, I replied. He didn't mean it. I didn't answer that. Because I wasn't sure it was true. And even if it was, it didn't change what he'd said. It didn't change the look on his face when he'd read the engraving and realized he'd been wrong. Not apologetic. Humiliated. Like being wrong about me was somehow worse than what he'd accused me of. I kissed my mother on the forehead and told her I'd call when I landed. She nodded, eyes wet, and I left before she could ask me to stay and smooth things over. I drove back to base in silence, windows down, letting the wind pull at my thoughts. I kept replaying the moment he'd grabbed my wrist. The moment he'd read the engraving. The moment he'd let go. And I kept coming back to the same realization. He hadn't just questioned the watch. He'd questioned me. Everything I'd built. Everything I'd earned. And in doing so, he'd shown me exactly how little he understood about who I'd become. Aiden and I weren't always like this. That's the part that makes it hurt more. We were close once, closer than most siblings I knew. Our father left when I was 12 and Aiden was 7. Walked out one Sunday morning and never came back. No note. No explanation. Just gone. Mom worked double shifts at the hospital after that, sometimes triple if she could get them, and I became the one who made sure Aiden ate dinner, finished his homework, got to school on time. I was the steady one. The responsible one. The one who showed up. I worked part-time through high school, bagging groceries, babysitting, whatever I could find, and still made honor roll. I helped Aiden with his math homework at kitchen tables in empty houses, quizzed him for tests while folding laundry, drove him to soccer practice in a car held together by duct tape and prayer. I didn't resent it. I loved him. He was my little brother, and someone had to make sure he was okay. When I got into the Air Force Academy at 22, Aiden was 17 and directionless. He'd barely graduated high school, had no plans for college, no clear sense of what he wanted. I worried about leaving him. I called home every chance I got between classes, after training, during rare moments of downtime. I sent letters. I encouraged him. I told him he could do anything he set his mind to, that he just needed to find his thing. He seemed proud of me back then. He'd tell his friends his sister was at the academy. He'd ask questions about what it was like, what I was learning. There was admiration in his voice, or at least I thought there was. When he turned 19, he enrolled in community college. I helped pay for it. Not all of it, Mom covered what she could, but I sent money when I could spare it, which wasn't often, but I did it anyway. When he needed a car for work, I co-signed the loan. When he got laid off from his first real job, I sent enough to cover his rent for 2 months. I never asked for repayment. He was my brother. That's what family did. He used to call me when things got hard. When he didn't know how to handle a breakup, or a bad boss, or the crushing weight of feeling like he wasn't going anywhere. I'd talk him through it. Remind him he was capable. Tell him to give it time. And he'd thank me. He'd say he didn't know what he'd do without me. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. I made captain at 31. It wasn't early, but it wasn't late either. I'd earned it through deployment cycles, leadership roles, and evaluations that reflected my work. I called home to tell Mom, and she cried happy tears, proud tears. Aiden was there when I called. I could hear him in the background. "Guess I'm the disappointment now," he said. He laughed when he said it, so I laughed too. But later, when I replayed the call in my mind, I wondered if he'd meant it. The promotions kept coming. 03, 04. Each one felt like validation for the years I'd put in, the sacrifices I'd made. But each one also seemed to widen the gap between Aiden and me. He stopped asking about my work. Stopped congratulating me. Started making comments instead, small digs about taxpayer money, about government benefits, about how easy I must have it. I told myself he was just going through a phase. That he'd find his footing eventually. That once he got stable, things would smooth out between us. But they didn't. The worse his situation got, the more jobs he cycled through, the more financial trouble he landed in, the more he seemed to resent me. Like my stability was a personal insult. Like I'd somehow taken something from him by succeeding. I didn't see it clearly until the watch incident. Until he grabbed my wrist and accused me of theft. Until I saw the look on his face when he realized he was wrong, not relief, not embarrassment, but something closer to anger. Like being wrong about me was worse than what he'd assumed. Looking back now, I can trace the cracks. The moments when his jokes stopped being funny. The times he borrowed money and stopped saying thank you. The subtle shift from admiration to comparison to resentment. I wasn't his rival. I never wanted to be. I was the person who showed up for him, over and over, even when it cost me. I was the one who believed in him when he didn't believe in himself. And he looked at me and saw someone who'd left him behind. The truth is, our paths diverged a long time ago. Not because I chose to leave him, but because I chose to build something and he chose to stay stuck. And instead of building his own path, he measured the distance between us and decided it was my fault. That's what hurt the most. Not the accusation. Not the grab. The realization that in his mind, I wasn't the sister who helped raise him. I was the reason he felt small. And no amount of phone calls or loans or encouragement was ever going to change that. Aiden didn't come home that night. I sat at the kitchen table long after my mother went to bed, nursing a cup of tea that had gone cold an hour ago, staring at the door like he might walk through it and apologize. He didn't. Around midnight, Mom came back downstairs in her robe, eyes puffy. She sat across from me without saying anything at first, just folded her hands on the table and looked at them. "He gets overwhelmed sometimes," she said finally. "You know how he is." I did know. I'd known for years. Aiden had a pattern. Pressure built, he lashed out, then he disappeared until someone smoothed things over. Usually Mom. Sometimes me. He'd come back eventually, act like nothing happened, and we'd all pretend the explosion hadn't occurred because it was easier than confronting it. "This isn't about being overwhelmed," I said quietly. "He's going through a lot right now. The job situation, the money, Mom." I looked at her. "He accused me of stealing." She flinched. "He didn't mean it that way." "Then what way did he mean it?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Because there was no other way to mean it. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of the day settle into my shoulders. He grabbed me. He twisted my wrist to check the engraving because he genuinely believed I'd stolen a watch. He didn't ask where it came from. He didn't give me the benefit of the doubt. He assumed the worst. He was surprised he was looking for a reason to tear me down, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. I softened it. And he found one. Or thought he did. Mom pressed her lips together, blinking hard. I could see her trying to find a way to make it okay, to explain it away, to turn it into something smaller than it was. That's what she'd always done. Minimize. Smooth over. Keep the peace. He's your brother, she said finally. I know. And I love him. But that doesn't mean I have to accept this. She looked up at me surprised. Like the idea that I might not accept it hadn't occurred to her. I stood, rinsed my cup, and placed it carefully in the sink. My wrist still ached where he grabbed it. I rolled it slowly, feeling the stiffness. I've spent 20 years earning everything I have, I said, my back still to her. Academy. Training. Deployments. Evaluations. Flight quals. Staff assignments. Selection boards. None of it was handed to me. None of it came easy. And the one person who should know that better than anyone just looked at me and assumed I cheated. I turned to face her. Do you understand what that means? She didn't answer. It means he doesn't see me as someone who works hard. He sees me as someone who got lucky. Or worse, someone who took shortcuts. And I can't fix that for him. I can't make him see what he's determined not to see. I left her sitting there and went upstairs. I didn't sleep much. I kept replaying the moment he'd read the engraving. The way his face changed. The way he'd let go of my wrist like it burned him. Property of CIA. Special Ops. It wasn't even my engraving. It was just standard issue from a joint task force I'd been assigned to for 6 months 2 years ago. Interagency coordination, high-level clearance, nothing I could discuss in detail even if I wanted to. The watch was a piece of equipment, practical and functional, given to personnel who needed reliable time across operations that spanned multiple zones and required split-second accuracy. I didn't ask for it. Didn't request special treatment. It was issued the same way boots and flight suits were issued, because the job required it. But Aiden saw it and assumed theft. Assumed I couldn't possibly have earned it. Assumed the worst version of me was more believable than the real one. I thought about all the times I'd defended him. To teachers who said he wasn't trying. To coaches who cut him from teams. To Mom when she worried he'd never find his way. I'd always believed in him, even when he didn't believe in himself. And the one time I needed him to believe in me, he couldn't. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, looking at the watch on my wrist. The second hand swept smoothly around the dial, precise and unrelenting. I thought about the sailors I'd led, the officers I'd mentored, the missions I'd coordinated. I thought about the trust required to do this work, the trust that people would show up, follow through, execute under pressure. Trust I'd earned, over and over, in situations that mattered. And my own brother didn't trust me enough to assume I'd come by a watch honestly. The realization settled over me like a weight. This wasn't something I could fix with a phone call or a conversation. This was deeper. This was years of resentment compounding into something toxic. And the worst part was, I'd been maintaining the relationship alone, propping it up, making excuses, smoothing over the rough parts while he took more emotional space than he gave. I'd been doing all the work. And he'd been keeping score. By the time the sun came up, I'd made a decision. Not dramatic. Not angry. Just clear. I wasn't going to keep carrying a relationship he wasn't willing to help lift. When I came downstairs that morning, Mom was making coffee, moving quietly like she hadn't slept either. I'm heading back to base early, I said. She turned, surprised. I thought you had until tomorrow. I do. But I need to get back. It wasn't true. I had another day of leave. But I couldn't stay in that house, waiting for Aiden to come back and pretend nothing had happened. I couldn't sit through another cycle of avoidance and minimization. Mom nodded slowly, understanding more than she wanted to admit. Will you call when you land? Of course. She hugged me longer than usual, holding on like she was afraid to let go. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. I'm sorry, she whispered. It's not your fault, I said. But part of me wondered if it was. If years of smoothing things over, of making excuses, of protecting him from consequences had taught him that he didn't have to take responsibility for his actions, that someone would always clean up the mess. I drove back to base in silence, windows up this time, the hum of the engine the only sound. I thought about the question I'd been avoiding: what am I still holding together and why? And I didn't have a good answer anymore. Aiden came back 3 days later. I wasn't there. I'd already returned to my rotation, but Mom called to tell me. She said he walked in like nothing had happened, asked what was for dinner, settled onto the couch with his phone. Did he say anything? I asked. About what? About the watch. About what he said. A pause. No. Of course not. I waited. Gave him space to reach out, to acknowledge what he'd done, to make it right. A week passed. Then 2. Nothing. Not a text. Not a call. Not even a half-hearted attempt at deflection. Just silence, which I realized was its own kind of statement. He thought if he waited long enough, I'd let it go. Like I always had. But I didn't. When he finally did reach out, a casual text asking if I'd talked to Mom lately, I didn't respond the way I used to. I didn't smooth it over or pretend things were fine. I replied with one sentence: "We need to talk about what happened." He didn't answer for 6 hours. When he did, it was, "What happened?" I stared at the message, feeling something harden in my chest. He was going to make me spell it out. Going to make me be the one to bring it up, to rehash it, to be the difficult one who couldn't just move on. I typed back, "You grabbed me. You accused me of theft. That's what happened." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. Appeared again. Finally, I was just surprised. "You overreacted." Overreacted. I set my phone down and walked away from it. Went for a run. 6 miles, hard and fast, until my lungs burned and my legs ached and I couldn't think about anything except breathing. When I got back, I showered, made coffee, sat on my couch, and picked up the phone again. His message was still there: "You overreacted." I deleted the draft I'd started, the one where I explained why his words mattered, why his assumptions hurt, why what he'd done was wrong. I deleted it because I realized something he already knew. He knew exactly what he'd done. He just didn't think it was a big enough deal to warrant an apology. So I sent this instead: "Don't put your hands on me. Don't accuse me of dishonesty. We're not doing that." Simple. Clear. A boundary, not a negotiation. He called immediately. I didn't answer. He called again. I let it ring. Finally, a text: "You're being dramatic." Then another: "It was just a joke." Then, "You think you're above us now, don't you?" There it was. The real issue. Not the watch. Not the accusation. The fact that I wasn't letting him get away with it. The fact that I was holding him accountable instead of absorbing it and moving on. I replied once more: "If you can't talk to me with respect, I'll step back." And then I muted the conversation. The next few days were strange. I kept expecting to feel guilty, to second-guess the boundary I'd set, to wonder if I was being too harsh. But I didn't. I felt lighter. Clearer. Like I'd finally put down something I'd been carrying too long. Mom called, of course. Her voice was gentle but worried. "Aiden says you two had a fight." "We didn't fight." I set a boundary. "He thinks you're mad at him." "I'm not mad. I'm done accepting behavior I wouldn't tolerate from anyone else." "He's family, Selena." "I know. That's why it matters." She sighed, and I could hear the exhaustion in it. "Can't you just talk to him? Work it out?" I tried. He called it a joke and said I overreacted. So no, we're not working it out. Not until he's ready to actually acknowledge what he did. He's struggling right now, Mom. I kept my voice soft but firm. I love him. I always will. But I'm not going to let him treat me like this just because he's struggling. Struggling doesn't give you permission to hurt people. She didn't say anything for a long time. Then, quietly, "You sound different." I am different. I had to be. After we hung up, I sat with that. I did sound different. Because I was different. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to fix Aiden's problems or manage his emotions or smooth over his mistakes. I wasn't absorbing his resentment or making excuses for his behavior. I was just stepping back. And the space that created felt like oxygen. Over the next few weeks, he tested the boundary in small ways. A meme sent late at night, no context, just an olive branch disguised as humor. A question about Mom's birthday. A comment on a post I'd made. I responded politely but didn't engage beyond surface level. I didn't ignore him completely. That felt punitive, and that wasn't the point. But I also didn't pretend things were normal. Because they weren't. The real consequence for Aiden wasn't my anger or my disappointment. It was this. For the first time in his life, I wasn't his fallback plan. I wasn't the person he could count on to show up no matter how he treated me. I wasn't the safety net that let him avoid facing his own choices. And that, I realized, was harder for him than anything I could have said. 2 months after the watch incident, I got a call from Mom. Aiden had overdrafted his account again. He'd missed a car payment. He'd gotten into an argument at work that almost cost him his job. Small fires, all of them, but fires nonetheless. "Can you talk to him?" she asked. "Has he asked me to?" A pause. "No." Then no. "Selena, Mom, I'm not doing this anymore. He knows how to reach me. If he wants to talk, he can reach out." Respectfully. She sighed, and I could hear the weight of it, the years of mediating, of trying to hold us together, of carrying emotional labor that wasn't hers to carry. "I just want my kids to get along," she said quietly. "I want that too, but not at the cost of my self-respect." After we hung up, I thought about what I'd said. It was true. I did want us to get along. But I wanted it to be real, not just me contorting myself to avoid conflict. Meanwhile, my own life steadied in ways I hadn't expected. Work became sharper, clearer. I got a commendation from my SF commander for a planning cycle that went flawlessly. My evaluation came back stronger than the last one. There was talk of an O5 track opening up, nothing guaranteed, but possible. I started sleeping better. Waking up without the low-grade anxiety that had become so familiar I'd stopped noticing it. I realized how much mental bandwidth the relationship with Aiden had consumed, the constant monitoring, the anticipation of the next dig, the bracing for conflict. Without that drain, I felt more myself than I had in years. I went for morning runs without checking my phone first. I read on my porch without guilt. I laughed more easily. I stopped second-guessing every decision, every word, every interaction. I'd spent so long managing Aiden's emotions that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist without that weight. One evening, I was sitting outside with coffee, watching the sky shift from blue to orange, when my phone buzzed. A text from Aiden. "Mom says you won't help me anymore." I read it twice, feeling the familiar pull, the instinct to explain, to soften, to fix. But I didn't give in to it. I wrote back, "I'll help when there's mutual respect. Right now, there isn't." 3 dots. Then nothing. A week later, another message. "Must be nice to have everything handed to you." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He was looking for a reaction, a fight, anything to pull me back into the old dynamic. I didn't give him one. The silence that followed wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. And for the first time, I wasn't trying to fill it. I thought about the transformation that had happened, not dramatic, not explosive, just a slow, steady shift from being his emotional crutch to being a neutral presence. I wasn't angry. I wasn't punishing him. I was just done carrying something he wasn't willing to help lift. And that clarity felt like freedom. 3 months after I set the boundary, Aiden sent a text. Short, almost formal. "Didn't mean to grab you. Sorry if it came off wrong." I read it sitting in my office between meetings, and I felt nothing. Not relief. Not vindication. Just a flat, neutral acknowledgement that he'd sent words into the void. It wasn't accountability. It was a probe. A test to see if the door was still open. I set my phone down and finished my coffee before responding. When I did, I kept it simple. "I appreciate the message. We'll rebuild when we both show up differently." He didn't reply. Over the next few weeks, the contact was sparse. A meme here, a question about Mom there. Small gestures, carefully neutral, like he was feeling out the edges of the boundary I'd set. I responded when appropriate. Polite but not warm. Present but not engaged. I wasn't punishing him. I was protecting both of us from falling back into the old pattern, the one where I absorbed his resentment and he avoided responsibility. Mom asked once if we'd made up. I told her we were figuring it out. She seemed relieved, even though nothing had actually changed. But something had changed for me. I stopped waiting for him to understand what he'd done. Stopped hoping he'd have some moment of clarity where he saw me clearly and apologized sincerely. I realized I didn't need that anymore. I'd spent years trying to be enough for him, supportive enough, patient enough, present enough. And it was never enough because the problem wasn't me. The problem was that he'd built his identity around resenting mine. And I couldn't fix that for him. Around this time, I deployed again. Nothing dramatic, routine rotation, familiar work. But the distance helped. Being away from the situation, away from the pressure to manage his emotions or smooth things over, gave me perspective. I realized how much lighter I felt. How much clearer my thinking was. How much more present I could be in my work when I wasn't constantly monitoring a relationship that required all my effort and gave nothing back. I'd been maintaining the relationship alone for years. Propping it up. Filling the silences. Making excuses. And he'd just let me. The revelation wasn't painful. It was clarifying. I thought about trust, how it's built through consistency, through showing up, through integrity. I thought about how many times I'd shown up for Aiden and how few times he'd shown up for me. And I realized the trust one needed to rebuild wasn't with him. It was with myself. Trust that I could set boundaries and keep them. Trust that I didn't have to earn love by absorbing bad treatment. Trust that I was allowed to protect my peace. Halfway through the deployment, I got another text from Aiden. Just a photo, Mom's birthday dinner, the table set, everyone smiling. No message. Just the image. I looked at it for a long time. He wasn't in the photo. Just Mom and a few cousins. I wondered if he'd taken it or if someone had sent it to him. I wondered if it was an invitation or just information. I replied, looks nice. Hope it was fun. Neutral. Honest. Not an opening, not a closing. Just a response. He didn't reply. And I was okay with that. Because rebuilding trust wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic reconciliations. It was about truth. About showing up honestly, without pretense, without the old scripts. We could still be siblings. But I wasn't going to be his emotional scaffolding anymore. I wasn't going to carry the weight of our relationship alone. If it was going to work, it had to be different. Real. Balanced. And if he wasn't ready for that, then we'd stay in this neutral space until he was. Or maybe we'd stay here permanently. And that would be okay too. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't defined by my ability to hold him together. I was just me. Whole. Clear. Free. And that was enough. For months in, something shifted. Small, barely noticeable, but there. Aiden got a new job. Better pay, better hours. Something with actual stability. Mom mentioned it casually during one of our calls, and I said I was glad. I meant it. I wanted good things for him. I just didn't want to be responsible for making them happen anymore. He texted me a week later. New gig is going well. Feels different this time. I replied, that's great. Keep it up. Short. Supportive. Boundaried. He didn't push for more and I didn't offer it. But over the next few weeks, the tone of his messages changed. Less defensive. Less sarcastic. Just quieter. Like he was trying to figure out how to talk to me now that the old dynamic was gone. I didn't rush it. Didn't try to force progress. I just stayed steady. One afternoon, I was running errands on base when my phone rang. Aiden. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hey, he said. Hey. A pause. Not uncomfortable, just present. How long are you home next month? He asked. 4 days. Why? Mom's birthday. Thought maybe we could all have dinner. I considered it. Not the instinctive yes I would have given before. A real consideration. I can do that, I said. As long as it's respectful. It will be. Okay. Another pause. Selena. Yeah. I'm sorry. For real this time. I was out of line. I stopped walking. Stood there in the middle of the parking lot, phone pressed to my ear, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not vindication, not relief. Just quiet acknowledgement. Thank you, I said. I mean it. I know. We didn't talk long after that. Just a few more details about the dinner, a quick mention of his new job, then we hung up. I stood there for a moment, looking at my phone, feeling the weight of 4 months of distance and silence compress into something smaller, more manageable. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a step. When I got home that evening, I sat on my porch with coffee and thought about the journey, the watch, the accusation, The boundary, the silence, the slow, uneven path toward something that might eventually look like trust. I thought about how much I'd changed. Not because I'd become harder or colder, but because I'd finally learned to value my peace as much as I valued the relationship. I'd spent years trying to be the bridge between Aiden and stability. And in the process, I'd forgotten that I wasn't responsible for holding him up. I was only responsible for showing up as myself, honestly, clearly, without shrinking. The version of me that set the boundary wasn't meaner or less compassionate. She was just clearer. She knew her worth. She knew what she'd earned. And she refused to let anyone, even family, make her doubt that. I looked down at the watch on my wrist. The engraving was still there, still true, still a reminder of work I'd done and couldn't talk about. But it didn't represent tension anymore. It represented the moment I stopped shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. The next morning, I went for a run. Early, before the sun was fully up, the air cool and sharp. I ran without music, just the sound of my breath and my footsteps, steady and sure. I thought about the dinner next month. About sitting across from Aiden and seeing if the change in his tone translated to real, sustained respect. About whether this was the start of something new or just a temporary lull. I didn't know. And for the first time, I was okay with not knowing. Because I wasn't carrying the relationship alone anymore. And if it didn't work out, if he fell back into old patterns, I'd be fine. I'd already proven that to myself. When I got back from the run, I showered, made coffee, sat on the porch again. The sun was fully up now, the day stretching out ahead of me, clear and open. I felt peace. Not the absence of conflict, but something deeper, a quiet certainty that I was exactly where I needed to be. Whole, clear, free. And if someone questioned my worth, I'd let them. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed living. I finished my coffee, rinsed the cup, and got ready for work. Another day, another set of responsibilities, another chance to show up as the person I'd spent years becoming. 30 years is a long time to carry a story. Long enough for the sharp edges to smooth, for the weight of old wounds to shift into something you can hold without bleeding. Long enough for everything to change, and for some things to stay exactly the same. I'm 68 now. Rear Admiral retired. The stars came off 5 years ago, replaced by quiet mornings and a calendar I control completely. No deployments. No classified briefings. No midnight calls that rearrange continents. Just coffee on the porch, books I've been meaning to read for decades, and a garden that doesn't care about my rank. Aiden is 63. He never made it rich, never became the success story he thought he was supposed to be. But he's stable now in ways that matter more than money. Steady job in municipal planning, decent apartment, friends who show up when he calls. He's been sober for 12 years, a detail Mom mentioned once and never brought up again, which told me everything about how bad it had gotten before he got help. Mom passed 4 years ago. Peaceful in her sleep, the way everyone hopes for. Aiden and I stood together at her funeral, not quite side by side, but close enough. We didn't talk much that day. We didn't need to. We both knew what we'd lost, not just her, but the buffer she'd provided for decades, the person who'd smoothed our edges and filled our silences. After she died, I wondered if we'd drift completely. If without her gentle insistence that we stay connected, we'd simply fade from each other's lives like acquaintances who'd run out of things to say. But we didn't. We talk maybe once a month now. Sometimes more, sometimes less. The conversations are shorter than they used to be, more practical. Health updates, weather, occasional reminiscing about Mom. But they're real. No performance. No posturing. Just two people who share history and DNA and not much else, trying to figure out what that means in the fourth quarter of life. The watch is in a box in my study now, sitting next to my dress uniform and the medals I never look at anymore. I haven't worn it in years. The battery died sometime after my retirement, and I never bothered replacing it. It's just an object now, stripped of the power it once held. Sometimes I forget it's even there. But every now and then, when I'm cleaning or looking for something else, I'll come across it and pause. I'll remember that day in Mom's kitchen, the grab, the twist, the engraving, the look on Aiden's face when he realized he'd been wrong. And I'll feel an echo of what I felt then, not anger anymore, but something quieter. A reminder of who I had to become to survive that moment. I'm in the garden when Aiden calls. It's a Tuesday afternoon in late April, the kind of day where spring finally feels real instead of theoretical. I'm on my knees in the dirt, planting tomatoes, when my phone buzzes in my pocket. "Hey," I say, wiping soil off my hands before answering. "Hey." His voice sounds different. Thinner somehow. "You busy?" "Just gardening." "What's up?" A pause. Long enough that I sit back on my heels, suddenly alert. "I'm at the cardiologist," he says. "They found something." My chest tightens. "What kind of something?" "Blockage." "Significant," they said. "They want to do a procedure next week." I close my eyes, feeling the sun on my face, the dirt under my knees, the weight of 68 years pressing down. "Are you scared?" "Yeah," he says quietly. "Yeah, I am." We talk for 20 minutes. I ask questions, good ones, the kind that come from decades of assessing situations and cutting through noise to find what matters. He answers honestly, no bravado, no deflection. Just fear and uncertainty and the strange vulnerability that comes when your body reminds you it won't last forever. Before we hang up, I say, "I'll come out." For the procedure. "You don't have to, I know." "I'm coming anyway." He's quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay, thanks." After we hang up, I sit in the garden for a long time, dirt on my knees, sun on my shoulders, thinking about time and what it does to people. How it softens some things and hardens others. How 30 years ago, I might have dropped everything and rushed to fix this for him. How now, I'm choosing to show up not out of obligation or guilt, but because underneath everything, the resentment, the boundaries, the years of careful distance, he's still my brother. And I still care what happens to him. I fly out 5 days later. He lives in a mid-sized city I've never visited, in an apartment complex that's clean but worn, the kind of place where people land when they've figured out stability matters more than status. He meets me at the door looking older than I expected. I knew he'd aged, we all have, but seeing it in person is different. His hair is mostly gray now, thinner on top. His face is lined in ways that speak of stress and cigarettes he quit years ago and nights that were harder than they needed to be. But his eyes are clear. Sober. Present. "You look good," he says, and I think he means it. "So do you," I lie, and we both smile because we know it's a lie. His apartment is small but organized. No clutter. No chaos. A couch that's seen better days, but is clean. A kitchen table with 2 chairs. Photos on the wall, mom, mostly, and a few of people I don't recognize. Friends, maybe. Or coworkers. A life I'm not part of. We have dinner that night at a quiet restaurant near his place. Nothing fancy. Just pasta and bread and conversation that flows easier than I expected. He asks about retirement, and I tell him the truth. It's strange and good and sometimes boring, and I'm still figuring out who I am without the structure of service. I ask about his work, and he lights up a little, talking about a park renovation project he's managing, the politics of city planning, the satisfaction of seeing something he designed actually get built. We don't talk about the past. Not directly. But it's there, humming underneath everything like a current we've learned to swim around instead of against. At one point, he looks at me and says, "I never thanked you." For what? For showing up. All those years. I wasn't good at seeing it then, but I see it now. I set down my fork, surprised by the sudden thickness in my throat. "You don't have to, I do," he says. I was angry for a long time. At you, at myself, at how things turned out. I blamed you for a lot of things that weren't your fault. And you still showed up. I don't know what to say. So I just nod. "I'm glad you're here," he adds quietly. Me too. The procedure happens on a Thursday morning. I sit in the waiting room with a book I can't focus on, watching families come and go, thinking about all the waiting rooms I've sat in over the years, military hospitals, deployment send-offs, promotion boards. Always waiting for something uncertain to resolve into something known. The surgeon comes out after 2 hours. "Successful," he says. "Clean repair. Aiden will need to change some things, diet, exercise, stress management, but the prognosis is good." I exhale for what feels like the first time in days. When they let me see him, he's groggy but awake, trying to smile through the fog of anesthesia. "You're still here," he murmurs. "Where else would I be?" He closes his eyes. "I thought maybe you'd leave." After they said I was okay. "I'm staying through the weekend. Make sure you're settled." He nods, already drifting back to sleep. I sit in the chair beside his bed, watching the monitors beep their steady rhythms, thinking about how strange it is to see him like this, vulnerable, undefended, just a person in a hospital bed like any other. That night, back at his apartment, I find myself going through old photos he has in a drawer. Mom, young and smiling. Aiden and me as kids, gap-toothed and sunburned. Me in my academy uniform, looking impossibly young. Him at various ages, 20, 30, 40, each photo capturing a different version of someone I thought I knew, but maybe never fully understood. I find one near the bottom of the stack, the two of us at Mom's 65th birthday. I'm in civilian clothes, home on leave. Aiden has his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling at the camera. I don't remember who took it, but I remember the day. It was before the watch incident. Before the fracture that never fully healed. We looked happy then. Or at least, we looked like siblings who still believed they'd always be close. I put the photo back carefully and closed the drawer. The next few days fall into a rhythm. I help Aiden with practical things, groceries, medication schedules, follow-up appointments. He's still weak, moving slowly, but improving. We watch old movies in the evenings, make simple meals together, talk in short bursts between long silences. On Saturday afternoon, we're sitting on his small balcony, the city stretching out below us, when he says, "Do you remember the watch?" I glance over, surprised. We haven't talked about it in 30 years. Not directly. I remember, I say. He nods, looking out at the skyline. I think about it sometimes. How stupid I was. How convinced I was that you didn't deserve what you had. You were going through a lot. That's not an excuse. He turns to look at me. I was jealous. Bitter. I hated that you'd built something and I hadn't. And instead of dealing with that, I tried to tear you down. I'm quiet for a moment, letting the words settle. Why are you bringing this up now? Because I'm 63 and I just had a heart procedure and I'm realizing I don't have unlimited time to say things I should have said decades ago. He pauses. I was wrong. About everything. And I'm sorry. Not the half-assed apology I gave you back then. A real one. I was wrong and I hurt you and I'm sorry. I feel something shift in my chest, not forgiveness exactly, because I forgave him years ago without fully realizing it. Something else. Release maybe. The final letting go of a weight I didn't know I was still carrying. Thank you, I say quietly. We sit in silence for a while, watching the sun move across the buildings. Do you still have it? He asks eventually. The watch. I do. In a box somewhere. Battery's dead. He smiles faintly. Probably worth something now. Probably. You should fix it. Wear it. I shake my head. I don't need to. It's served its purpose. He looks at me curiously. What purpose? I think about how to answer that. About the boundary I set that day. About the version of myself I had to become. About the 30 years that followed, the distance, the healing, the slow reconstruction of something that looked less like the relationship we'd had and more like the relationship we could actually sustain. It reminded me who I was, I say finally. When someone tried to tell me I was something else. He nods slowly. I'm glad you didn't let me. Me too. That evening, I cooked dinner in his small kitchen. Something simple, heart-healthy, the kind of meal he'll need to get used to making. We eat at the table by the window, talking about nothing important, and it feels almost normal. Almost easy. After dinner, he pulls out an old photo album I haven't seen before. We flip through it together, laughing at terrible haircuts and questionable fashion choices, remembering people who've died and people who've drifted away and moments that felt enormous at the time but barely register now. There's a photo of me in flight gear, standing in front of an aircraft I can't identify anymore. Aiden points to it. I used to show people this, he says. Tell them my sister was a pilot. I was proud of you, even when I acted like I wasn't. I know, I say. And I realize I did know. Somewhere underneath all the resentment and competition, there was pride. It just got buried under his own pain. We stay up later than we should, given his recovery, talking about Mom, about the past, about the futures we thought we'd have versus the ones we got. At some point, the conversation circles back to the watch, and I find myself telling him things I've never told anyone about the operation it represented, as much as I can without violating clearances that still technically apply. About the weight of command. About the cost of the choices I made. He listens without interrupting, and I realize this might be the first time he's actually heard me. Not just listened, but heard. I never understood what you gave up, he says when I finish. I just saw what you had. Most people don't understand. That's okay. It's not, though. I should have understood. Or at least tried. I shrug. We were both doing the best we could with what we had. Were we? I consider that. Maybe not. But we're doing better now. He smiles, and it reaches his eyes this time. Yeah, we are. I fly home on Sunday evening. Aiden insists on driving me to the airport despite my protests. We don't say much on the drive. When we get to departures, he pulls over and turns to me. Thank you for coming, he says. It meant more than you know. You're welcome. He hesitates, then reaches over and pulls me into an awkward hug across the center console. I hug him back, feeling the boniness of his shoulders, the fragility of a body that just reminded him it won't last forever. When we pull apart, his eyes are wet. Love you, sis, he says. It's the first time he's said it in 30 years. Love you too, I reply. And I mean it. I watch him drive away, then head into the terminal, feeling lighter than I have in decades. Not because everything is fixed, it's not. Not because we're suddenly close in ways we never were, we're not. But because we've finally arrived at something real. Something honest. Something built not on obligation or guilt or old patterns, but on the simple fact that we're siblings who've hurt each other and survived it and decided that still means something. The flight home is quiet. I sit by the window, watching the landscape shrink below me, thinking about time and healing and the strange mathematics of family. How you can be furious with someone and love them simultaneously. How distance can be both a wound and a medicine. How 30 years can feel like forever and like nothing at all. I think about the watch, sitting in its box in my study. About the woman I was when I wore it, 38, angry, hurt, learning to set boundaries for the first time. About the woman I am now, 68, retired, softer in some ways and harder in others. I think about Aiden at 63, finally sober, finally stable, finally able to look back and see what he couldn't see then. About the brother he was jealous, bitter, lashing out. About the brother he is now scared, grateful, trying. We're not the people we were 30 years ago. And that's the only reason this works. When I get home, I go straight to my study. I find the box with the watch, open it, hold the timepiece in my palm. The metal is cool and heavy. The engraving is still there, property of CIA, special OPS. For a moment, I consider what Aiden said. About fixing it. Wearing it. But I don't need to wear it to remember what it taught me. I put it back in the box, close the lid, and set it on the shelf where it's lived for years. Then I go to the kitchen, make tea, and sit on the porch as the sun sets. I think about calling Aiden to make sure he made it home okay, but I don't. He's fine. And if he's not, he'll call. That's what we do now. We show up when it matters. We give each other space when it doesn't. We don't try to be something we're not. And somehow, 30 years later, that's enough. I finish my tea as the last light fades from the sky. Tomorrow I'll go back to my garden, my books, my quiet life. Tomorrow I'll be 68 and retired and content in ways my 38-year-old self couldn't have imagined. But tonight, I'm just a sister who showed up for her brother when he needed it. Who set boundaries when she had to. Who walked away when staying would have broken her. Who came back when the time was right. The watch didn't make me strong. It just showed me I already was. And 30 years later, I'm still learning what that means. Thanks for sticking with me through this one. If you've ever had a moment where someone's doubt or disrespect pushed you to finally draw a line, I'd love to hear it. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do? Had someone twist your success into a reason to resent you? Or had to step back from a relationship to protect your own peace? Drop your story in the comments. You never know who it might help. And if this resonated with you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. There are more true stories coming about boundaries, self-worth, and what it really takes to stand up for yourself. I'll see you in the next one.